Hello and welcome everybody. Today I'm going to be discussing the state of history with Monica, who is from Bookworm to Bookworm. So today we're going to be looking at a pretty wide range of things that apply to the state of history. So welcome Monica.
Hey,
how's it going?
It's going well. It's going well. It's been a good day today, so things have been good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I just noticed that this bust of Herodotus I pulled up has some sort of weird stain on the forehead. I don't know what that's about.
Oh, wow.
I'm just going to leave it up there. It's fine.
Sounds good.
But yeah, so I guess when we talk about the state of history as a field, we should probably start off with, the most basic issue of how does one get into the field in the first place?
Absolutely. Well, there's a variety of ways to get into the field. I mean, number one would be an interest. What particular interest you want to go into, what field, what specialization.
Yeah. So, and I guess there are a number of ways to get in. You could also get in without a degree. I mean, some people become interested in a topic, they study it quite a bit, or maybe they do more of the reenacting side of things, or they might get into it. If you're going through the college route, which I guess is what we're both most familiar with, then you major in history or minor in it, and usually that involves having to learn about research methodology. You have to learn a little bit about historiography, so you got to learn about the major thinkers in terms of the ontology of history, and then you of course have to develop some sort of minimal expertise in one or two areas of history. And that usually also involves reading the prior works of great scholars in the field. And then you also have to learn about primary sources, secondary sources, how to write, how to cite things. So those are sort of the basic skill sets to go into academic history. And there's also things you need to pick up, by the way, if you weren't officially credentialed, because those are pretty much indispensable parts of doing history.
Absolutely. How to research properly. I think what social scientists enjoy the most is the research part. Most people who I speak to, whether or not they're degreed, I really don't hold a lot of value in either or. Both sides are important to me, but they enjoy the research. They enjoy the reading about it and stuff like that. And finding out new topics. So yeah, absolutely. That's a big chunk of it, is the research part.
Yeah, and then grad school would be the next step, I guess. And that one is something that I guess a lot of people end up not doing, not only because of the time, money, and all that, but also just because a lot of times they don't tell you when you're an undergrad that to really make it in academic grad school, you pretty much have to start preparing for it from at least your second year in college, if not earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And so depending on what field of history you go into, there are prerequisites if you're trying to become, even a master's level student, although most people can probably make a master's program. But if you're trying to make a PhD program, then there's a lot of preparation you need to put in before you enter. So for instance, in my field in ancient history, they expect you to have about 2 to 3 years of Greek and Latin before you step foot in grad school. Which means that a lot of people who have degrees in ancient history actually got their undergrad in classics. And it's also worth mentioning you can actually go into grad school for something a little bit different than what you major in. Usually it has to be related, but it can be technically different. And so there's a lot of crossover between, say, ancient history and classics, or between American history and American studies, or a number of other things that are closely related. But yeah, you definitely, if you know what field you want to study, you need to be very proactive about making sure you meet all the prerequisites, especially languages, because those are the ones that are the hardest to pick up, that take a long time to master, and also are not taught everywhere. So,
what was your experience learning those languages for your graduate program?
So I figured out early what I wanted to do.
Okay.
And that was crucial because the place I was going the place I attended as an undergrad only offered 2 years of Greek and Latin.
Okay.
And actually, it only offered 2 years of Latin when I first started, and then Greek got revived for the first time since the early 90s. So it came back my second or third year, and I was able to get my 2 years in. Well, over the course of me being an undergrad, pretty much every ancient history grad program increased the number of years they wanted you to have to 3.
Mm-hmm.
So going in, it was 2, and now it's 3.
Mm-hmm.
So my options were to do a post-bac at a place like Chapel Hill, where I would just study Greek and Latin for a year,
Right.
out of pocket, of course, because, you know. Anyway, my other option was to go to Kentucky, and I would have, I'd just be doing my master's in history, but I also have to take a number of courses to get my Greek and Latin up to certain levels. That's what I ended up doing, you know, because I had the prospect of getting funded that way.
Mm-hmm.
So there are ways to do it, but yeah, language for a lot of fields, whether we're talking about Asian or ancient history or whatever it might be, language is usually the biggest obstacle, I would say.
Also, I will explain to people who are interested is you're not always going to be able to take classes or research and read books that you find interesting.
Right.
So that was a little bit annoying to me when I was in several programs, several classes. And that's okay. Those are, you know, hoops of fire that graduate students will have to jump through. So for example, if you're interested, so in your area, you know, you have your specialty, and you breeze through those classes because you're interested in it, you want to read about Rome and the like, but someone's going to put you in an American history class, and you're going to have to, you know, read some, you know, American history book that you may not find interesting, and then critique it and write on it and things like that, and that can be quite frustrating. So I will tell anyone who's interested in any type of historical program that be prepared for that. You know, and it can be defeating because the professor is interested in that topic. Clearly, they have listed the books they want you to read, so you will come across some books, some historians that you don't agree with, number one, that you don't find interesting, but I would just get through it. I would highly recommend you to just get through it because I experienced it, and it's off-putting. It's off-putting, but just get through it, okay?
Yeah, and I know too, like you're talking about, sometimes you end up in classes you don't want to be in. That can also apply to your TA work, because I actually was a TA once for an American History Part 2 class. And so that's obviously not what I studied.
Right.
But it was fine. It was actually an interesting experience because usually the kind of very basic American history courses, if you're good enough to go to grad school for history and you took these classes in undergrad or high school, you should probably be fine, honestly. But for the most part, yeah, you will have classes that are not necessarily right up your alley, which is also why it's important when you're going into grad school to look mostly at the professors you'll be working with when you're deciding. I mean, that's one of the huge factors you got to think about, like who are you working with, what did they do, and did their interest align with yours? So that's absolutely pivotal. You also want to look at the resources of the university as a whole. You don't want to go somewhere that lacks funding because otherwise you're going to be in financial difficulties pretty much the whole time. So those are huge factors to consider. Another one that people don't think about is that, you know, when you go to grad school, you're in your early to mid-20s mostly, and you're going to want to go somewhere that doesn't suck. You're going to want to go somewhere that's kind of fun. So you don't want to be somewhere where you're going to be bored out of your mind, because that will not be good for your productivity in the long run. So you do need a place where you can blow off steam. You know, so I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, even if it's not the most strictly academic advice. It's something that I would very much emphasize. So if everything else is equal and you're looking at a place where it looks like it might be a fun place, maybe it's got a decent dating scene or whatever, and you compare that to a place that seems boring and kind of rural or whatever, I would go with the one that's a little more exciting. Just because psychologically you will need some distractions at some point in your studies, and you're more likely to get that in a place that has some things happening.
Yeah, the social aspect. It's, you know, you mentioned something about who you're working with at the university. You're right about that. That could be make or break, right?
Yeah.
And that's something that a lot of professors talk about covertly and overtly. But yeah, it most people I know had some very interesting experiences in their graduate programs. They worked with some professors, myself included, who unfortunately we butted heads, and I worked with someone else, and it turned out fine. So a lot of times that happens because of personal situations. You could, maybe a professor just doesn't like you. I mean, you've had it.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, I've had that happen.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, you can be honest. I mean, and it's about them. It's not about you. So sometimes the professor just, and I've had that experience as well. I won't leave you out to dry with that one. So yeah, maybe the professor just doesn't like you. There's not anything you've done per se. Maybe someone who didn't like you prior told them something about you, and they judge you by someone else's opinion, which is completely low class in my opinion. So that can happen. It could be very elementary school, Mean Girls like type stuff in these grad programs. So you mentioned that, like, it depends on who you're working with, because if you're working with someone with integrity who's going to treat you like you treated them and really not get in the weeds on personalities, you'll be fine. If you work with someone who's listening to you and not someone who's arrogant and think they know everything, that's also important as well, because I've experienced some professors who in my graduate programs who are quite difficult to work with because number one, they were insecure about their own intellect, and definitely that was a big one. And another one was they just didn't specialize in something that I knew. I'm a social science. I knew what I was talking about, and their area was like, "Come on, say yama," or whatever. Like, instead of being upfront and saying, let's see what you're trying to do. I'm pretty sure we can work this out. It was completely trying to knock me off of my topic when I knew I was correct. I've been studying a certain part of history and urban history for years, mainly because of, a lot of it is my family story, right? So how the hell can you tell me, I don't care what some academic wrote, that academic who wrote it and published is wrong. So that is something you struggle with academics. Well, I read it in this book. Well, that person is wrong.
Because I think what makes an advisor good is that they're open to letting you explore ideas, even if they disagree with those ideas, and they can kind of judge objectively whether you put in the research to make the case you're trying to make. And I think most people would qualify as that. I think most professors are open in that way and want to encourage their students to develop. There are some who are pretty dogmatic, though, so you have to be careful choosing advisors. Fortunately, I was able to dodge probably one of the worst people ever because I had been pre-warned. But anyway, this person had taught one of my undergrad advisors at one point, and he had told her coming in that his specialty was classical Athens, which is not. So his specialty was actually Byzantium. So she went there on the expectation she studied with him doing Athens. He said, actually, I lied. I do Byzantine history, so that's what you're doing from now on. So when she got there, she found that out. And anyway, that would be probably the biggest horror story that I've ever experienced. That and just this person in general, overworking TAs, same guy, overworks TAs, talks about himself all class without really going into substance a lot of times, tended to hit on female grad students. So pretty much just the perfect storm of shittiness in one human. But for the most part, that kind of stuff doesn't happen too often, and you probably can avoid it with just a little bit of judgment when you meet somebody. I don't know. That being said, the other thing...
That's a sign of insecurity when a professor needs to stand in front of the class and beat their chest on a soapbox and talk about themselves all the time.
Yeah,
that's a sign of insecurity. So
yeah, this person also claimed that as an undergrad, he didn't do that well because he was just, he was going to Berkeley and he was just bored there because it wasn't challenging enough for him. He had to sit in his room and read Marx and Hegel and Weber all day because the professors just weren't engaging him enough.
Yeah, that's his imagination, because I can almost guarantee at a place like Berkeley, those professors are starkly engaged with Marx and Hegel and Weber.
And then also,
maybe if he went to the University of Durga, he might have that argument, but Berkeley, no way.
Well, he would name some of the people he studied under at Berkeley, and it would be some of the giants of the field, people who are legendary now. And I was just thinking, so you were just dicking around in your room when you could have been spending more time with Mamigliano or any of these other major scholars. Like, I don't understand. Well, anyway, this guy was a total piece of shit. We don't need to waste any more time talking about him. Well, it's true, though. Yeah. It is true.
Well, I mean, that's academia. Great advice I gained from one of the business books I was reading. They said if you're in a place, any academic place, as a student or as an employee, if you're in a place where everyone goes to one person for everything, you're in the wrong place.
Yes.
Right. If everyone goes to Dr. So-and-so for every single thing, whether it's Rome, Greek, Black history, American, if they go to that one person, find another institution, find another job, because no one knows everything. We're always learning every single day. I don't care how many degrees you have or don't have. You are fooling yourself if you think you know everything and you're too smart to learn something. And again, that's about the other person and less about you.
Right, exactly. So, I mean, that's, and I guess that's one of the dangers of smaller schools, or of, another thing to consider when you're applying to schools is you might be able to find a really cool advisor somewhere, but then if there's nobody around them, it would be hard to find a committee, and a lot of your classwork would be a problem because, you'd have to do a lot of things that are not in your field, which gives you breadth but can affect your depth negatively. And remember, when you're on the job market, we'll talk about in a minute, your research is super important, and your publications. So, so it's a balancing act.
And your research is, did you say research?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, that's highly important. What you're studying, what you're focusing on. That's something that's timely.
Yeah.
Working with my grad students, I have a lot of them writing their dissertations on COVID-19 stuff and the outcome of that, which is timely, right? So they're going to graduate with, research in that area, which clearly would make them attractive for an employer.
Right. Yeah, and that's the thing too, is a lot of history is very trendy. I've noticed there are sort of fields or subjects that become ultra popular, and sometimes that popularity proves to be fleeting. So the classic example would be in the 90s, a whole lot of people went out and earned PhDs in the Indian Wars period. So, mostly Indian Wars, I guess, from after the Civil War. So that was the real boom field at the time. Guess what? Most universities already had their quota of people studying that. So there are actually a lot of people still in the workforce today who have PhDs in the Indian Wars, and they have no job in the history field because it just was oversaturated with that specialty. But most of the time it's not that bad. I mean, that's kind of like the horror story example. So another example would be in my field, ancient history, especially for the last 30 to 40 years, there's been a long-term trend of late antiquity being emphasized at the expense of earlier antiquity. And it's gotten to the point where there are some people who think that earlier antiquity should be only in classics, not in history. So that's sort of a minefield I've been trying to navigate, because I do earlier antiquity. I do classical Athens and the Roman Republic. and things like that. And so a whole lot of history departments only do late antiquity. And also, when I was in grad school, I had to take a lot of late antiquity classes, which also means a lot of like history of Christianity, stuff like that. And those things don't really interest me that much. It did give me more teaching breadth, though. So there's that advantage, but at the same time, it didn't help me much with research, except to see some of the sort of legacies of maybe Plato, Aristotle, and some other people I'm interested in.
What do you think about academic hazing in these programs?
I think it's relatively minimal. That being said, it does happen. And sometimes you get professors who think that it's their mission in life to be gatekeepers and to determine who is and is not worthy of Cleo's affection, I guess you could say.
Yes.
I had one of those who, she was notorious for, you answer a question telling you you're right, but then saying you're right, but not in the right way. So she would come up with like imaginary nuances and tell you you're wrong even when you answer correctly. So there are people who do that kind of stuff. It's not that bad. I mean, any field you're in, any workplace environment, you're going to have people who are not ideal to work with. So I think it's usually fairly manageable, but there are times when people will contradict you for the sake of contradicting you if they have no real reason, or they can't articulate what it is they find objectionable.
You're the problem. That's usually what it is.
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, that's also. I mean, I've told you my theory on the word unprofessional. It's just a socially acceptable way to tell somebody you don't like them. I mean, that's what it is. That's what the word exists for.
Yeah.
I mean, that's all it is at the end of the day. And so, yeah, it's the other thing I guess that could happen a little bit in grad school is there are sometimes rivalries among students. I didn't run into that much, but I did see that happen some with other people.
Oh wow.
But for the most part, the main thing you got to be aware of dealing with other students in grad school, two things. One is that some departments, people are kind of atomized and they don't really interact enough, so there's not a lot of community. That's a major problem. I dealt with that back in Kentucky. The other problem, though, is that there are a lot of departments where the social trend is to sort of gang up almost on one or two weird people in the department and just make fun of them constantly. And a lot of times what you have to realize with grad schools is like when undergrad, everybody's on a first name basis. Usually people are kind of chill. People are more or less emotionally mature. In grad school, sometimes there's a reversion to high school, except it's sort of on the relative scale where everybody's a nerd, but you know, some people are more so than others, and now you have like a hierarchy within the department. And so that's something to be aware of. And usually all these departments are socially dominated by, if there's a woman who's single and attractive, she runs the department. You just got to be aware of that. That's just a fact. You know, it's like undeniable.
You just said that.
It's true, though. I mean, like, you know, sometimes it might take you a semester or two to figure it out. I'm just going to tell you straight up front. Figure out who the most attractive single female in your department is. That person is in charge socially, and there's nothing you can do about it. The end. So, yeah.
What are some other things that you think they should look out for?
Well, you will have various TA assignments. Some of them will be better than others, depending on who you're working with, professor-wise. You'll probably have at least one or two bad ones, and that can be anything from you just don't click with that professor and their methodology. Maybe it's a field you're not familiar with. Could be a number of things. I mean, I ran into probably the worst TA assignment I ever had was for a New Testament class once.
Oh, yeah.
And I understood the material fine. I took New Testament Lit, I know Greek history, I know all that stuff fairly well, at least for like intro to New Testament level stuff. And a lot of it was just professor was kind of a workaholic and really pushed for students to do a lot of busy work and had pretty bad pedantism, I would say. But he was also notorious for driving grad students way too hard because you're supposed to limit grad students to about 20 hours or so of work a week so that way they have time to do their classes and write and all that. And he definitely wanted grad students to be going above and beyond and be creating a lot of busy work and all that. So you can have bad experiences, but it in a way it's kind of helpful because then you sort of get a sense of what you do and don't like, what you do and don't prioritize.
Right.
What approaches there are to a topic, what you find effective or ineffective. Because I did learn things from even the professors I wasn't too fond of, like the guy I mentioned before, who I don't think very highly of. I did learn some things from him over time.
Good. Yeah, and
yeah,
if they don't like, and I'm going to tell you, if you do run across a professor that just doesn't like you, there's really not much you can do about it. And just keep in mind, you're only there for a short period of time. If you can try to avoid them, try. But if they don't like you, everything you do will be a problem. You can sit and not say anything and smile, and that smile will be a problem, right? You can sit, you can open the door for them and say, good morning, whoever, and that will be a problem. So there's nothing you can do about it.
Right.
I've experienced, you've experienced it. Most professors I know have that same story. I was just having this conversation with a colleague who experienced some severe academic hazing at the University of North Carolina because she just came up against a professor who just did not like her political views, which I had that issue. So it was personal, right? And which is crazy because it should never be personal, right? Professors, it's a revolving door of students, right? You see them one semester, you may have them for a couple of classes, but you won't see them again. Once the program is over, it's over. Like, it should never get personal. I'm a glass half full type of woman, so I just see it as try not to do my students that way, right?
Right.
Because if they like you, they excuse everything you do, right?
It seems like it.
You could be rude and loud and curse people out in class, and if that professor likes you, they see no fault in that. And I experienced that. I literally had a student, we both were students at the time, and he literally cursed another student out in class. And the professor, for whatever reason, didn't see a problem with it. They end up going to lunch together a couple weeks later. Yeah, but
that's just rank favoritism.
100%, and that's childish. But like again, that has nothing to do with you. It's more about the other person. Right?
Yeah, for sure.
That's a sign of just pettiness and insecurity and power tripping usually.
Yeah, because
they tell everybody else that they have a problem with you instead of talking to the person and saying, how that goes. Because
I know a lot of professors are very conscientious about such things to the point where they tend to be harder on their advisees just so that way no one would accuse them of being playing favorites. Yeah. I mean, so it can be a delicate balance, I think, and you also do get some eccentric personalities involved. Like you said, there are a number of people who will just choose to like or not like somebody for reasons that are not apparent in any way to anyone.
Or something someone else told them, right? So they hold someone else's value. Their opinion has value, right?
Right.
So they could say, you eat kids.
Yeah.
Wasn't that like a political issue?
Like, I mean, among the conspiracy theorists, they do believe that elites eat children.
Yeah, so they could say you eat kids, and then someone will believe it, and you're in the program, and so there you have it.
Yeah, I mean, so it's you never know what you're stepping into sometimes, but I feel like the one or two times I've had a professor who was a little hostile, I do two things to deal with that. One is I no-sell. So even if the person is clearly hostile and they don't like me and they're trying to make life miserable, I do not let on at all that it bothers me in any way. And the other thing I do is I just continue to try to kick ass and do the best I can. Good. And so usually that works, and if it doesn't, fuck them, I don't care. But it actually always has worked, so it's never been an issue. But that's how I always deal with that.
And if they've done it to you, they've probably done it to other people before. So they're a bully. They're just power tripping. And that's something I usually have a problem with. It's like, but yeah, just try not to let it bother you. Just have an objective, get into the program, know what you came in there for, and leave with the piece of paper.
Yeah, exactly.
And that miserable, lame professor who wasted all their energy on you. They probably wanted to be you. That's why they didn't like you. They woke up every morning and said, I wish I was you. I wish I was studying Rome.
And to be clear, though,
I wish I knew so much about what you know.
I mean, to be clear,
don't.
I mean, you know, most of the professors you'll encounter will be a lot more encouraging than that. I mean, some of them will be more neutral. You know, they will focus on whatever they're focusing on, but they usually are, you know, sort of friendly, neutral to random grad students, or they might even be very personable. Like one of my old advisors would talk to pretty much anybody in the department about whatever their research was, and, you know, make friends with them, even if it's something he had no idea what they were talking about. He'd still, you know, sort of try to befriend and encourage them. So I mean, yeah, you know, I think most of the professors are very much in the positive category in terms of how they interact, and some of them also, because, you know, they grew up as professional nerds. I mean, some of them also are very awkward. So sometimes you have to be careful about taking offense to things or thinking that they're coming after you, because sometimes it's just that they're awkward, and you know, like there's
sometimes they're not. Sometimes they really are coming after you.
Because there's one professor who intimidated people, partly because he had very forbidding assignments in terms of asking for page counts that were unreasonable for a term paper. But being in a seminar with him, I noticed that he ended all his questions in big prepositional phrases that are almost incomprehensible. So I'd always have to ask him to clarify questions, so that way I knew what he was trying to ask. But he actually wasn't mean or even stern. He's just you know, has a certain stature in his field. He's kind of reserved, and it comes across as being very dignified. But I think it started out as awkwardness. I mean, that's sort of how I take it. But anyway, once you get to know him, great guy. It's just it just takes a while to get to know him.
Right.
And so sometimes you have to kind of try to figure people out a little bit, and also realize that people don't usually. I mean, one of the requirements of academic history is not first-rate social skills.
And people have different personalities as well. You have to keep that in mind. No, but the students that we work with, it's nothing but positivity with the professors, like willing to help, willing to listen to students more so than dictate what they're going to do. Like I was just on a committee, and you know, a student wanted to do an ethnographic, but another, you know, professor was pushing her toward like a case study. Right. We all just sat down and we talked about why she wanted to take this approach, and we're like, hey, we want you to finish, so we're going to do what you want to do, you know, and it was great. So I agree, like when you're a part of a community like that, a program like that, that's fantastic, because we wanted this particular well, we want all of them, but this was a particular situation. We like, if you write about something that you want to write about, you're going to finish the program.
Right.
But you do have some situations where you have some professors who want you to do what they know how to do. So as a result, they try to transition you into something you don't want to do. You can't make a student write about, for example, apples when they are gun-ho on writing about oranges. They know about oranges. Stupid example, but they've studied it for 10 years. Why the heck would you do that? So you're asking for them to not finish, and that's unfortunate.
Because one thing I can say is that usually if you sit down and really talk with your professor about what you're doing research-wise, you can come up with a good compromise or a good because one thing that the more experienced party will be able to figure out better than you can is what's actually feasible within X amount of time. So a lot of times the topics you might come up with as a grad student will be way too broad and ambitious for the time scale you're working with. And so a lot of times your professor can help you narrow down what you're doing to make it just more easily accomplished. So yeah, I mean, I guess that's an important thing, is to make sure that you're doing something you want to do, but also something that you know you and your advisor agree is feasible. It can be kept at a reasonable length. So it is kind of a delicate dance, and that's again why it's really important to be on good terms with your advisor and make sure that you understand each other. And
it's your research. That's something you want to keep in mind. So don't allow someone to tell you what you're going to do. This is your research. You don't know where this research is going to take you. So keep that in mind too. Don't allow Yeah, I've experienced that, and that's something that I'm really serious about with my students. Like when they come to me with research, and it's too broad, like you mentioned, I sit down with them. I take the time. Tell me what you want to do and how can you narrow it, because you'll be here for 10 years and I don't want you to be here for 10 years. So how can you narrow it? Let's do it together. But we can stay with this topic. And most grad students come into a program with research they've already been studying for a significant amount of years.
Right.
So any professor who thinks they may know more or want to counter the student, you may be doing a very awkward dance with yourself, because this student has come in with research they've been studying for years. And that's something that I've experienced. I've had students who've come in studying, Cambodian immigrants, right? So how the hell can I tell them anything about Cambodian immigrants, right?
Right.
Like I'm going to help you apply what you know, methodology and what have you, applications, and we're going to get this thing taken care of.
Yeah, because a lot of times if you're trying to guide somebody's research and they do something that's a little different than what you do, a lot of it is just making sure they understand the big picture more so than the details. Like, so that's mostly like what I was talking about with my advisor, because the topic I ended up doing is something that he actually didn't really know that much about specifically, but he knew a lot about the overall context and some of the sort of large-scale debates that surround it. So a lot of times it's a framing issue. So that's something to keep in mind, is that you don't necessarily have to have the same field as somebody, or same subfield, I guess, in this case, in order to really figure out how to frame it and how to present it sometimes. So definitely getting that kind of insight from a more experienced researcher can always help. And I imagine the same is true for pretty much any topic, like especially, I don't know, like if you do, there's a lot of military historians tend to be more on the amateur side in terms of their affiliation, but talking with and sort of learning from someone who's been doing it longer will help you figure out how to actually complete a project, how to frame it, how to polish it, all that.
Also, I will say keep up with your topic, because the subject changes over time. So what people thought, so for example, what was the cause for a certain topic or issue in the 1960s may have evolved to something else by 2024. So you have to keep up with articles and books, and more new information has come out, new research has come out. So it's definitely important to keep up with the research. Yes, without a doubt, we have book nerds, historians who read. That's awesome. However, more research is always developing. Right. And I ran into that with in one of my programs. I had a couple of, I'm watching my words here, but the PhD program, definitely, I had one professor, didn't know any, this wasn't her area, but, she read probably 3 articles on, gentrification and black people, and she thought she knew everything, and she didn't. And then that's new now, right? Everyone wants to jump on the race bandwagon. She had no clue. She had no practical experience, right? This is and I'll give you some examples. So this isn't personal. I'm basing it off of the evidence that, listening to her speak, being familiar with dissertations she was with prior, no, she was wrong, right? So we were arguing about, not arguing because I don't have to argue. I'm right and you're wrong with this particular situation, because I knew she was trying to tell me to do a case study on Chicago and some other stuff. I won't go down that rabbit hole, but Chicago probably is the worst place to study when we're talking about integration. It's segregated. Everyone knows that. Yeah. You have the south side, the north side, the west. And anyone who's listening to this, they know about Richard Daley and what he did. They know what Martin Luther King, when he went to Chicago in order to integrate the city and housing, and you know that's another topic. But when she's telling me to do Chicago, I'm just looking at her like, you have no clue, right? Like, everyone knows that, you know, Chicago is one of the most segregated cities in the United States, right? Definitely was. There's some arguments that things are changing now, but no, I'm not doing Chicago, right? Yeah. So you're going to experience those professors who think they know something because they read a couple prestigious articles. And don't be afraid to challenge them. If you're right, don't allow someone with more power and authority when you're in these programs to make you think you're wrong when you're studying something. Because if you have the evidence, you have the facts, you know what you're talking about, stick with what you know. I also experienced another gentleman who was well-read but just hadn't kept up with the literature. So stuff he read from the 80s and the 90s was factual. But by, you know, late 90s, early 2000, the argument is changed. New developments have occurred, okay? And you'll experience those professors who are in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, and that's okay. It's a beautiful age. But they're in a position to where they feel like they know everything and they haven't read anything new. So I experienced that as well. So I had a couple of professors in that bracket, and you know they and I get it. You're at that age, you know, especially musicians. I work with older musicians as well who are in that age bracket, and they're the best because they've been around for so long.
Right.
So they have legitimate reason to kind of tell you to shut up. Musicians do.
Right.
Not academics, because it's always changing. Right. So what they read for the past 50 years, you know, they're coasting by the time they're 70 and 80, and for good reason, but you need to pick up a book or an article that was published maybe in 2022, 2023, 2024, because the literature has changed over time.
Right. That and it is interesting too with some of the older professors. I feel like when it comes to their main field, you know, they're usually on the cutting edge, especially if they got into, you know, tenure position at R2 or R1 school. So usually on that kind of stuff, they're, you know, up to snuff completely, and they know everything that's ever been written on the topic or just about. So they can tell you, you know, they can give you a very good selection of the old and the new and tell you what's really important. But when it comes to some of their secondary fields, that's usually where people become more outdated because it's not a passion for them. And so I think that's really where you got to watch out for outdated reading list, is when they're teaching a seminar on something that is a secondary field. Although usually with the big departments that rarely happens. So for instance, if I were to get a tenure track position at a major school, I would not be teaching any grad course in the Middle Ages. So it wouldn't end up being a problem. But if it were a smaller school, then, you know, I'm not going to stay up to date on the Middle Ages simply because I've got way too much other stuff to do with antiquity. So I do keep up to date on those topics because those are the things I really do and plan to publish on and all that. But yeah, and then I guess the other problem is that, you know, when you do your generals or quals readings in grad school, I mean, that's at a time when you have the opportunity and the structure to, you know, just read massive amounts of stuff and do almost nothing else. And, you know, I don't think there's really any other time in your life where you get that opportunity. So I think it is, to be fair, very difficult to stay up to date on everything. And I think really if you can just stay up to date in your own field, broadly speaking, not just your specific topic, but broadly speaking your whole field, I think you're probably doing enough. That being said, you are right. I mean, it is possible your professor has some outdated info, or they haven't considered something, and then the mark of a good professor is being able to acknowledge that, yeah, I didn't think of that, so that's pretty cool.
Oh, they would take it personal, right?
Because most of the ones I've had.
It's okay to not know everything.
Yeah.
That's something, it's okay to not know, especially in education. You're in academia. So it's okay to not know everything. It's okay to say, I did not know that. It's okay to say, I didn't think of that.
Yeah.
Right? I love collaborating with other academics, regardless of their level. I don't care what degree you have, if you have one, if you're a reenactor. I mean, I enjoy it. In fact, those are some of the best historians, the ones who just enjoy it, chose to, not necessarily go to school for it, but just reads about it all the time for fun.
Right.
So, yeah, I think it's important to sit down with someone and try to gauge one another's brain.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the general dichotomy I would follow is that if you're looking for sort of broad ideas on something, you usually look at the more academic sources. Sometimes you're looking for little details. It might be better to go with some of the amateurs, because a lot of times they will really hone in on details that a lot of the professional historians might not cover, because they usually are trying to discuss broad themes that make them relevant to their peers and relevant to the trends in academia. And sometimes those big themes, one of the good things about them, and part of the reason why it became prominent, aside from it just, what the cool kids are doing, is simply that it makes it more accessible to other historians who are not experts in that field, because they can relate things to the sort of grand idea you're talking about. So it can be useful, but at the same time, it can come at the expense of some of the little details. And of course, the downside of the detail side is that sometimes it's hard to figure out what the point is. So those are just two those are the big problems I notice with academic and amateur history in general. But I think if you combine the two and look at every available source of information that you can get your hands on, usually you end up with a pretty balanced picture. But it's a matter of understanding that any given source you look at will not give you everything you want, just like you can't go to one professor for your entire career. So a lot of it does involve using all your resources.
I would also recommend getting sleep.
Oh yeah, that helps.
It's going to be tough to get sleep in these programs, but make it a priority, because if you don't get sleep, you're going to not be able to retain information. Your professors may think something's wrong with you because you're not firing right, because you're tired, you're exhausted. So try to get sleep, okay? You cannot go 24 or 48 hours without sleeping. An hour or two a day is not healthy. You're not going to be able to read, function, get sleep. However you can, you have to get sleep.
I mean, sometimes the exception to that is like during finals week. I mean, there have been times where between grading and writing papers and taking exams, I've had to basically go all week with very minimal sleep, but that's only for a week. So usually going into that I was relatively well rested, and then I usually have a week to recover from that. But yeah, I used to have to do that a lot, and partly that's just taking language classes, because they tend to be extremely time consuming.
Oh, yes.
Because I'm not naturally very gifted at memorizing long lists of things like conjugations and all that, so I had to spend most of my time on language classes, both late undergrad and grad school.
That's tough.
Yeah. So, but yeah, so for the most part though, you do want to make sure that you're well rested, because sometimes it can be a very long finals week in grad school, because you're burning the candle on both ends, because you're both a student and an instructor in most cases. And so you're getting pounded from every direction. Well,
what do you think of the
phrasing.
politics of these programs?
It depends, because it depends on the field. Like, I guess most of them tend to be fairly left-leaning, but in a fairly generic way. I don't feel like there's a lot of meaningful commitment politically. A lot of it is just kind of an adherence to generally democratic politics, I guess.
Right.
But certainly I've never seen what Fox News promises.
Oh, goodness.
I mean, maybe there are departments out there like that, but I've never encountered one.
Well, I wouldn't say I encountered a department, but I encountered a chair of a department, my department, who didn't like what I was writing.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, I guess, there are definitely, every department has usually one or two people who are kind of notorious for either being overly political or just generally invasive.
Well, this particular person was pretty conservative, and just didn't know a lot. So, when you're in a position to where you're the chair of the department and you specialize in, hola, como está,
Yeah.
and someone hits you with facts, you can't you can't compete. You can't. So what you do is just try to, send people in on them to try to knock them down.
Right. Yeah. I've also encountered kind of the opposite of that. I mean, I didn't deal with this person directly, but when I was an undergrad, there was one professor who was notorious for kind of being like the purest Marxist and letting everybody know that his politics were pure and more informed and more experienced than theirs, because he had been involved in he had been present as a grad student, I think, when there was a coup in Latin America or something.
Oh wow!
And so he'd always talk about I know what I'm talking about. I've seen the shit you guys haven't. So he'd also say if people disagree with them or they were dragging their feet on an issue, he'd be like, my colleagues are cowards and liars.
What?
He'd say that kind of stuff at meetings. So I mean, it can happen. I mean, and again, but it boils down to you get back to every workplace has people who are not pleasant. One, and then two, one of the requirements of being an academic is not social grace. So those kind of things are bound to happen when you factor all that in.
Get through it.
Yeah. But he also apparently one time in a class heard a student saying something racist about the Mexican War.
Oh no.
Saying that the reason why Santa Anna lost is because his troops were all Mexicans.
Oh no.
And so this professor looked at that kid and then said, "You're a fucking idiot, you know that?"
Wow.
And I don't know if he got in trouble for that. I bet he did.
The professor said that?
Yeah.
Wow. Did I tell you about that professor? He was the chair of the department who said black women aren't hot in the class.
Wow, no, I didn't know about
and then
that.
he tried to mask it as if he was saying it about, how he tried, after he said it, he tried to mask it as if he was talking about someone else. We were all talking, he was trying to, send a message.
Yeah, that could be a lot of things. I mean, it could be some sort of awkward attempt at something that clearly didn't play.
Awkward attempt to take a person down a peg who he thought they thought that they were super important. So that was a way of subliminally taking someone down a peg. Yeah, we all talked about it after class, but again, when professors, people in power, not even professors, but people in power, when they do stuff like that, it's more about them than you. You intimidate them so much that they have to think of the worst thing to say to try to take you down a peg because you intimidate them so much. So keep that in mind. It's never about you. It's about them.
Because, I don't think most professors are probably intimidated too much by grad students. That being said, there are some who I think maybe are. It's hard to tell. I know one professor advised me early on. He's like, look, you got to understand something when you're dealing with professors. He said, you have to understand that on a certain level, you're coming for their job.
You think so?
I mean, maybe not directly because normally you have the generational divide to separate that. But, in a general broad sense, I guess you kind of are. Because eventually you join the field as a colleague and, I don't know if that would make you a rival necessarily, but it does make you an alternative.
You make a good point, because the same professor who said that did say to the same class, no one here is going to hire you. So that's the same jackass. That should tell you something about this person. And this particular dude, who was the chair of the department, he had a reputation of having issues with women of a certain color. He, a pattern. We call that a pattern in business, right? You have a pattern, a paper trail of being this dude.
Yeah.
So we already know what you're about. But again, that's their issue, not yours.
Right, and that's very unique problem to have.
It is.
I don't know. I'm trying to imagine.
I'm gonna tell you more about this dude off mic.
Okay, yeah, because that's. I don't know what he would be trying to accomplish.
Nothing. He doesn't work at the university anymore.
Yeah. Also, I just don't know how in his head he figured, oh yeah, this is gonna play.
Yeah. That's when you don't have the proper professionalism, social skills, and when you specialize in Moino SL Web.
Yeah.
You say stuff like that.
Kind of like the guy from Community pretended he knew Spanish. Held down a job for several years, yeah. Kim Jong's character.
Yeah.
I am a Spanish genius. But, yeah. So, I guess, once you get through grad school or you're even selecting your research, however you do it, what do you think are some of the major research trends that are kind of hot right now, and what do you think might be coming down the pike?
That's an excellent question. Well, I would say, like, currently, since the George Floyd situation has happened, a lot of my students are writing about social justice stuff, like I mentioned. A lot of them are writing about COVID-19, the impact of COVID, and a significant amount of them are writing about the business models, how that has changed since COVID. So, for example, I have one grad student who is writing about how people had to work from home during COVID. So, like a year or two, we were working from home, would you say? What do you think?
A solid year.
A solid year, okay. So, how businesses are now staying with that business, like that model, right? So maybe they were occupying a building, an actual structure, but these firms have now decided that we're going to cut costs, definitely overhead. Now we have our employees work from home. We'll supply them with a computer and whatever they need, but it cuts down on overhead. We'll sell the building. So I have a couple of students kind of writing about the business model and how that has changed since COVID.
Okay.
And I have a couple of students who are researching, and they're doing this from a historical lens. So they're talking about, for example, they're talking about, this is kind of nerdy, so I'll try not to nerd out too much on their topic, but they're talking about how historically there was a time when you would go to a store and the employee would have to grab the item for you in the back and then give it to you, right? So maybe like the 1930s.
Yeah, or Walmart right now if you need nail clippers.
Right.
Which I found out the hard way the other day.
What?
Yeah, I had to get somebody to open up a case. I could get nail clippers the other day. I don't know why. I assumed they were getting stolen somehow.
Oh yeah,
which seems like a very random thing to be thieving. Like, starting up a side business on eBay for nail clippers.
That is so interesting that you said that. I went the other day. It's probably been 2 weeks. I needed a steamer, like an actual steamer, and it was locked up.
Yeah.
I had to wait 20 minutes for someone to come with the keys.
Yeah, I mean, given how customer service is in this area,
yeah,
it takes like 10 times longer than anywhere else. So,
but no, that's what they're writing about historically. They're writing about the transition. Now we're back to people having to go and get a product from somewhere else. So you're a picker. We're back to the picker model, and they go through an entire historical lens about how we're back to where we were. There was a time when someone picked your item for you and brought it to you, and now we're back to that again, is what they're talking about. And clearly everything is delivered now. So yeah, the COVID-19 stuff, the social justice content, people are writing about that through a historical lens. Of course, they're comparing it to the 1960s, especially like the burning of everything. You guys have been around for that. And I have an older woman on the committee. She brings a wealth of knowledge. She's fantastic. She's wonderful. She talks about, she was alive for the 60s, so she's like, she thinks it's worse. She thinks we've progressed. I mean, come on, you can't say we haven't. But she says that, you know, what we saw after George Floyd was worse than the 1960s. I wasn't there, so I listened, but she brings a wealth of knowledge and gives some good insight on that. I would say Hispanic history, Chicano history is definitely popular now. Looking at immigration is popular at this time. What do you think?
Well, from what I've observed, I think that last decade was very much about big, broad themes and interdisciplinary stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we're now heading in a pattern of more dispersal. So I think that right now what we're seeing is people doing more things that are kind of very specialized, and they've accepted that it will have a readership of 12 people.
Yeah.
So I think for a while, a lot of scholars were uncomfortable with that, but I think at this point, people are kind of okay with it. I've noticed a lot of specialized studies that will not appeal to any but a very small number of people that have come out in the last several years in both Greek and Roman history. There still are those big idea pieces, but I think a lot of those are becoming more specialized too, where it will be, say, Greek comedy, and without trying to, do how does it influence modern comedy and how is this a broader scope study. And when I say that this is the trend, what I mean is just that it's becoming a little more prominent relative to the bigger studies. But those bigger studies are still happening, just like the more micro studies were still happening in the last 10 to 20 years. But that's where I see things heading, is toward more dispersal. In terms of new sort of trending topics, there are some things I think will remain around, like, race, class, gender stuff. That's still very prominent.
Meat and potatoes for sure.
But I think that there are going to be some more things that are more specific to circumstances now. And one of the ones I'm really hopeful for, maybe this is just wishful thinking because it's what I do, but I think democratic accountability is going to be emphasized heavily, and that's largely because we actually see a president on trial right now. And so that topic will probably gain some prominence. I know I had a recent job interview where I talked about some of my research on that in that regard, and that elicited some positive responses. And I think it's because of what we're seeing happening right now.
34 counts.
So, yeah.
Bleach, blonde, bush body. What would you say? What would you say are some topics that students, and I don't want to dissuade because I think it's important that students do what they want to do. I'm pro that. But what would you say are some topics that may not be the best topics to go into?
Well, at one point I would have said that really hyper-specific classics topics about, say, nouns and an author might not be the best topic because it's so narrow, and it certainly would hinder you in going into history probably. But I have seen a lot of job searches recently in classics where they're looking for exactly those kind of really narrow research interests that are very driven by etymology and things like that. So actually, if you have an interest in some random detail of grammar for Greek or Latin, go for it, because actually there are jobs for that. So so that would be one that I guess is more viable than I realized. In terms of things that probably won't do you very many favors, I think the main thing is trying to avoid topics that are over-farmed. So I would never advise someone on an academic level to study World War II.
Right. That's what I was thinking World War II, and the next one was the Civil War.
Yeah.
Unless you can find a different approach.
That being said, a lot of the really big name Civil War historians have retired or died in recent years. So there are, even if you don't do anything super creative, as long as you're good with what you do, I think you actually probably can find a niche.
What can you say about the Civil War that hasn't already been said? So I just downloaded this book on my Kindle about the Combahee River, Harriet Tubman, and that has a pretty good argument. I mean, I don't know everything about the Civil War. I don't know everything about a lot, you know, but I do like to know a lot of stuff about different things. That's just my personality. But when I downloaded, I was like, oh, what angle can this take that I haven't already read? But it actually has a really good argument. It's about the Combahee River. You guys can check it out. And Harriet Tubman, on how she participated in that. And it has a good argument on how enslaved people freed themselves. Right? So
Right.
there was we know about the Emancipation Proclamation and, of course, the 13th Amendment, but it has really good references, which I like. So it's well researched, which I appreciate. And it talks about how, slaves free themselves. Like, Americans are fighting Americans. Slaves are not slaves anymore. They're not enslaved. They leave, right? So it's a good argument, and it's Civil War based. So
Right.
I would agree that maybe there is a way to find a different angle on the Civil War if it's something like that.
Yeah. So I guess if you can find either a new way to frame it, or look, because I mean on the military side, which I guess at this point a lot of Civil War military history is handled by people outside of the academic world. But there are still several battles that don't have an account, really. And there probably is information in archives that you could piece together something with, at least for one of those 100-page Osprey-style books. But, so there are still opportunities, I would say, both for new things and for some revision. I know Sean's written a number of books in the Civil War, mostly
Right.
battles, but
The battles, yeah.
I think he does have some more grand ideas about it in terms of, say, the relationship between the way the Civil War was fought and the Napoleonic style of fighting, or sort of like the idea of the politics that went into creating the Republican generals. So Lincoln trying to figure out how to get fellow Republicans to be his commanders. So I mean, there are angles that haven't really been explored, I guess. But it is difficult because of how much saturation there is. But when it comes to something like, say, World War II, I think in that case, it's one of those things, because I know if I were running an academic job search, I would just assume that anybody who does anything modern knows more than enough about World War II to function. So I'm not really looking for an expert in that, because a lot of people who are experts in that know literally nothing else.
And now you have a lot of my students told me about that show about if Nazi Germany would have won.
Yeah.
I forget the name of it.
The High Castle
There
or
you
whatever
go.
it is.
I was gonna say if I would have kept talking, it would have came to my mind. But right, so you have that type of information available, and students like that topic too. They really like to talk about if Nazi Germany would have won, which is interesting.
Yeah, it's also interesting how much less fanfare, or not fanfare, I don't know if fanfare is the word, but how much less attention, say, Imperial Japan gets.
I agree.
Although I did find some random novel once.
Or the Philippines.
Yeah,
Or in the Pacific.
Yeah, I did find some random novel once about, Japan conquered the U.S. in World War II, and now they have giant robots, and, so, I guess it has been done a little bit, but it's just, less popular.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you got alternative scenarios about the Cold War. I think the Cold War is still one that people can study because there's still things being declassified, and obviously you can break through the dichotomy because a lot of countries were pursuing their own agendas. I mean, I know there's been a lot of scholarship about West Africa trying to play both sides to get money. So it's not they didn't really have that much of a stake in the capitalism versus communism debate.
Or those countries trying to get resources from them, chiefly uranium.
But also to get things like dams and things built for them, so they were trading resources for that. But a lot of it too is sometimes the U.S. and Soviet Union would actually give away stuff because they're just trying to find allies in this ideological struggle, and a lot of people who took those resources didn't give a damn about that struggle. They just wanted resources.
Yeah.
Or even looking at France's path through the Cold War, because France, I mean, it was largely NATO, but it also was doing its own thing. It was not following the U.S. directly. So I mean, there's a lot of things you could do, I think, that would be interesting in the Cold War. I think there are a lot of topics that are very viable. I think, any topic could be viable, but some of them you'll have to dig a lot harder and deeper to find something new or interesting to say. And there's also a never-ending glut of biographies on like Jesus, Napoleon, who's the other one? Washington.
Oh yes, MacArthur.
Alexander the Great sometimes, not as often. Well, Caesar, those are, it's like there's certain figures that just have way too many biographies. And I guess that's mostly not academic historians, but it seems like every popular historian at some point cranks one of those out.
Yeah, and there's value in them, for sure.
Well, they make money. You know? I mean, I don't know if there's that much value, but they make money.
Yeah.
And that's why people write, just like textbooks, which are, you know, kind of trash, but they do make money.
Lincoln.
Oh yeah, Lincoln's the other one, yeah. MLK, Lincoln, and who would be the other big biography guy that comes out all the time? Actually, yeah, that would be an interesting discussion sometimes, like the most over-discussed people.
Yeah. Lincoln?
Yeah, Lincoln's got to be up there. Although, I don't know, because Napoleon does have a lot of biographies in a lot of different languages. And a lot of them are very long, too, like ridiculously long.
Yeah, he's romanticized. People like Napoleon.
Yeah.
I was reading this article about how a population in the United States at the time wanted George Washington to be the American Napoleon.
Yeah.
Just march across, you know, the United States.
Well,
And conquer Mexico. It was an interesting article. I didn't agree with it, but I don't have
yeah,
to.
I don't.
It was. I found it interesting.
I think one of the problems with that is that Washington was dead by the time Napoleon became famous, or at least he was on his deathbed or closing in on it.
Right.
And also, he was nowhere near the general Napoleon was.
Right. This historian enjoyed Washington, and that's okay.
Is it that same guy we read?
No, it wasn't.
Okay,
It was it was someone else.
All right.
But no, I don't have to agree with them, but I enjoy the argument. But that is something that I guess if you're trying to go in any type of program, history program, and the like, you know, have an argument and be able to back it up with evidence and facts.
Yeah.
Just the facts. What TV show was that would say that? Just the facts. Just the facts.
I feel like there are probably a few YouTube channels that have that kind of...
No, it was a TV show.
Okay.
Someone will say it, you know.
Yeah.
There was a TV show that was kind of like their line. They would say, just the facts. Just the facts.
Yeah.
But you know, that's what you have to deal with whatever you want to write about. People don't have, and you're going to come across people who don't agree. But just have evidence, be able to back it up, have an argument, stick to it, and there you have it.
Yeah, because I mean, in general, I'm all about, you know, a very unorthodox approach whenever you can find one. That being said, I do hope history avoids the pitfalls of the true crime world, where it's all kinds of whacked out shit and just crazy ideas that make no sense, and people who clearly need a better hobby because some of them just, I don't know. Sometimes I just watch those videos to laugh at them when they come up with different theories about famous serial killers, and I don't know what planet they live on because it's not this one.
Patricia Cornwell, I guess, oh man, it's probably been, yikes. I guess it's probably been 20 years since she came out with that book. Where I believe she writes about, she's usually a fiction writer. She has her character, it's called Kate something. Anyway, but this particular situation, she dives into the true crime sphere, where she talks about Jack the Ripper, and she says, it's a great historical book about, you know, Jack the Ripper, all that stuff. And she thinks she knows who it was. It was, according to her, it's been a long time since I read that book, but she says it was a man named Dan Sickle.
You mean the guy from the Civil War?
No, stop it. But man, it's been about 20 years. If I'm getting the name wrong, I'm sure someone will have no problem telling me. But I believe she said it was a man named Dan Sickle who had some issues with women, some social issues, psychological issues with women. and pretty much went on a rampage. So so history has dived into that true crime era. You can look up the book. I'm sure someone will. But it was a good read. She's Patricia Cornwell is a good writer.
Yeah, that's one of the other things in history that you need to develop to succeed is good writing skills, because I mean, that's indispensable, I think, to getting your point across and maintaining readership, especially because we're in a world where reading is not popular, and I think that's partly why academic scholarship is dispersing so much, is because people have given up on being popular writers, because it's not going to happen, and so that's why things have become more dispersed. But yeah, it's I guess that is another thing to keep in mind, is that if you do write history for the general public, you're probably going to be kind of disappointed by the response, just because of how few people have the attention span and reading skills to get through a basic book.
And your writing can improve.
Yeah.
We both can talk about that firsthand, where it'll evolve, it'll get better. You'll start off bad and it'll improve. You and I have had struggles with that. You and I talk about that. So don't get defeated when you turn in trash or you feel like it's not good. Usually it's happening because, well, it happens for a variety of reasons. But number one, make sure you know the content. And like I said, writing it's mechanical, as one of my professors told me, and you will always improve. So if you're a bad writer on Tuesday, doesn't mean you're going to still be a bad writer 2 Tuesdays from that Tuesday. So, but why do you think reading is not popular?
I mean, I just don't. I mean, I've seen a lot of bookstores go under. I know from teaching that a lot of students are very averse to reading even, fairly short things. They claim to not understand them. So it's very discouraging, I have to say, when you assign 20 pages of something that is not terribly difficult and students act like it was an impossibly long, impossibly hard uphill task, even though they had a week to do it.
It's the book of Jeremiah.
Yeah. Like, they act like, I gave them a Sisyphean task, and it's just...
Do you think it's... So, this is something I'm a reader. That's just something I prefer. I don't push that on students, but you do need to read, so I do require reading. So do you think it's related to the content, or do you think it's the reading? So, for example, if I was to put, Kobe Bryant's book, Black Mamba, in front of a student, would they tear that book down? Or if I hand them... Because this is something that, I try to give material to students. Like, you pick the book.
Right.
That's something I learned from my 7th grade librarian, who has probably passed away now. But she really got me into reading. I won't say her name because I'll probably look her up and something. But she's probably passed away now. But no, that's how I got into reading. Like, she would say, like, you take those 7th grade trips to the library, and she would say, what do you find interesting? Like, tell me. Right. And, like, she literally went through the library, took her time. I will never forget this. And I told her what my interest was, and she would go through and pull out because she was a librarian. She knew that library like the back of her hand. She would go through and pull out every single book. And wow. And that's phenomenal. She was awesome.
She knew her way around it.
She was awesome. And that's how I got into reading. And then of course, it's sectored into other stuff. So I went from what I enjoyed as a 7th grader, right, to finding other stuff interesting, to finding this interesting, Yeah. So I mean, but that's just me. That's me. I like fiction and nonfiction. It really doesn't matter.
Sure. Yeah, I know what you mean.
So do you think it's related to like students not wanting to read maybe history, or is it in general? But because you made an excellent point, you said bookstores have gone under, and anyone who's familiar with what's going on in modern times can say, yeah, that's pretty factual.
I think a lot of it is just that reading in general, at least for what's going on right now, I based on some of the things that students didn't seem to get, I can't imagine giving them any reading that they would get.
Understood.
And I've had a few students actually approach me in the last year or two and say that they have reading comprehension problems.
Okay.
Which I can't do anything about.
Okay.
So
you think it's related to maybe attention span and reading comprehension?
I think it's attention span, digital problems with people becoming too accustomed to only reading text messages or whatever, and that, and just the education system not emphasizing the humanities nearly enough. I mean, so that focus on STEM is coming back to bite us in the ass in a very big way.
Okay.
So I think that's also another thing to keep in mind when we talk about the state of history, is that a lot of times you will find that the audiences that you are trying to engage with might not be capable of making the engagement that they need to be.
Okay.
I think at this point you would have historians, I would say, have less influence than they did a generation or two ago because of just literacy issues. There just isn't, the general public is just not very well educated at all, and they're not really capable in most instances of engaging with serious issues.
Do you think it's I don't think, I give the general public the benefit of the doubt. I'm not as harsh as you are on that, but hey, that's your opinion. Do you think it's because the general public is pretty much just defeated on life issues, so they've just checked out?
I think it could be that kind of black-pilled approach. Yeah, that could be a lot of it. So that's definitely a factor, I would say.
The red pill approach.
Well, the black-pilled is in, like, just throw up your hands. And,
yeah.
So there's definitely that problem. I don't know. It's just that doesn't seem like there's as strong of an appreciation for the past as there was even when I was growing up. And I'm not even sure it was that strong at that time either, but it was probably stronger than it is now. It's becoming more and more. History used to be something that I feel like was kind of known and shared more. And I feel like now it's become almost as specialized and accessible in some ways as, like, astrophysics, but only because of the public's decline in terms of intellectual ability. And a lot of it is a very specific subset of intellectual ability: reading comprehension, understanding how literacy works. That being said, some positive signs within the negative. I think people are more skeptical today, which is something you need to be a good historian. A certain amount of skepticism, a healthy suspicion of sort of biases that might be built into something. So those are positive traits that could help. But at a certain point, I mean, for that to have any impact, people have to be eager and willing to engage in history, and not just World War II. So that's, yeah, it's one of my, also I do have sort of I think I do have a long essay in me about how World War II actually, as a field of study, has kind of fucked over the entire field of history.
Why do you think that?
Well, the long story short is that World War II is this great exception to everything that's ever happened ever. And so learning about World War II, if that's all you know about, you're going to misinterpret and misunderstand everything else you study.
Mm-hmm.
And so, anyway, but that's kind of my hot take. I think World War II, the study of World War II in many ways is counterproductive, especially if people focus very hard on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's, people like World War II. When I have students pick a topic, it's at the top of the list.
I think I've told you before, I allow my students, if I'm teaching World Civ 1 up to 1500, I'll tell my students you can write about any topic you want within this chronological time frame.
Yeah.
And I'll still get stuff on the Titanic, the Civil Rights era, and mostly World War II. Mm-hmm. No matter how I phrase it, no matter how clear it is, I still get that shit every time.
Right. That's what they like. That's their interest. Yeah.
It's the thing they can copy paste from a high school paper they did,
You said it. I was thinking it. I didn't say it. But yeah, that's pretty much it. But perhaps it's because high schools may drive those topics in the ground. So
Yeah, I think that's probably the case. I know, like every high school teacher I had, at least most of them were all about that topic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But
I find Nazi Germany the most interesting part of World War II, more than anything,
yeah,
for a variety of reasons.
I guess for me, the most interesting part of the war would be the minor powers and what they were up to.
Mm-hmm.
Like what were the Romanians hoping to accomplish?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So for me, that's more interesting than the major powers. But
right. And the African troops who fought in World War II, you know, their colonies.
Yeah.
Right? So I find that interesting, which oftentimes isn't talked about. You know, Africa sent a lot of troops to Allied powers.
Yeah. Or I mean the Free French
Mm-hmm.
operating from basically the Sahara
Mm-hmm.
and then invading Tunisia.
Mm-hmm.
I mean that has to be a wild campaign
Right.
logistically. I mean because that's
Mm-hmm.
very, very difficult to do just
Right.
logistically.
I had a student write a stellar paper on World War II, and it was probably because of his ethnic background, but he wrote a lot about not only did Hitler clearly have an objective with people who practice Judaism, but it wasn't just Jews. You know, and this particular student wrote a paper about the other people who Hitler attacked.
Yeah.
And wanted to exterminate, which I thought was phenomenal. Yeah, it was really good, well researched. Like I said, it's because of his interest, but yeah, it was really good, and it wasn't just Jewish people who Hitler wanted to rid the country of.
Right. Yeah, I mean, gypsies,
Right.
gay people, I mean, any other group that you could think of that he didn't like.
People who he thought was mentally.
Yeah, people who were born with any kind of intellectual
Right.
disability,
Who he thought
physical
they
disability.
may not have had any type of mental disability. That was just his perspective,
Yeah.
the Nazi perspective, So physical ailments or whatever. So
Yeah.
that's unfortunate that goes awry when we start talking about World War II. People who may have been biracial.
Yeah.
Hitler wanted to get rid of them. So yeah.
Yeah, no, he had his idea of clearing up living space also involved, annihilating the Slavs
Yeah,
and, yeah, I mean, but also just because of just how purely evil he was, I don't think studying him sometimes helps to elucidate other people.
Did I tell you that story about how why do our conversations always turn out? But that person I told you who I met who went to hell, he died and went to hell, and came back and said he's seen Hitler.
Like Hitler was sitting there like with a daiquiri.
This is a true story. I'm
Okay.
dead, bro.
Oh.
Yes, he was a professor. I'm not going to say his name because people will look him up. But no, he was a professor. He did not believe in God. He was an atheist. And he died and went to hell. And it's a long story, but he said he's seen Hitler. And he said it was clear that it was Hitler because he had the mustache and everything. And, perhaps we should get him on the podcast and talk to him. But yeah, he's not an atheist anymore. But he said Hitler, he actually joined the divinity school. So, yeah. But yeah, he said Hitler, I did not, that's his story, not mine, but
Yeah.
he said that is where Hitler is. I don't know. But I'm sure you know, as a professor, you've been teaching long enough, you'll have students who say Hitler was good.
I haven't had any students say it, but I've had people on the internet say that.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it. They will defend it because that's their position. It's not mine.
Yeah. Speaking of historical references, while we're on grievances, I guess. So, especially with the Trump trial recently, I've noticed, because obviously there are a lot of misuses of things like the invasion of Poland as a metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
But recently I've noticed the Republicans have been saying that the Democrats have crossed the Rubicon.
Oh my.
Okay, so that's a very specific reference to when negotiations broke down between two sides in the Roman Senate, and then Caesar crossed the Rubicon to defend his interest. Trump is not in a position to cross a Rubicon. Biden is not in a position to cross a Rubicon because he's currently in the equivalent of Rome. So it's not possible or plausible for someone to cross the Rubicon right now, in terms of something that would be anywhere analogous with the actual crossing of the Rubicon.
Right.
So as an historical analogy, people need to pay more attention to what it means, and not just repeat tropes that they don't understand. Or there was one article that came out that was saying Barron Trump might become Batman because his father's being so persecuted.
Wow.
And that they've crossed the Rubicon and created Barron Trump Batman. And they kept using the phrase cross the Rubicon. I'm like, you clearly don't understand the reference at all. And it's just frustrating. Maybe I'm being pedantic about it, I don't know, but it bothers me when people misuse very basic historical analogies. Or I had this one guy I knew compared anything he didn't like to Hitler invading Poland. No matter what it was just like when Hitler invaded Poland. And I'm pretty sure the thing about invading Poland is that it was just an act of aggression by a big power against a smaller power.
Right.
So that would be a better metaphor if you're talking about some, I don't know, 5th grade bully beating up kindergartners for their lunch money or something, you know? That would make more sense than it would like, oh yeah, I didn't really like that bill. I don't like what they're doing now with Medicare. It's just like when Hitler invaded Poland, man. Exactly like it.
That bothers you. You know what really grinds my gears?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of does, because I'm just, in general, I don't know. I feel like if you're going to use a metaphor over and over and over, you should know what it means.
Yeah.
So even if you just have one that you lean on heavily, just make sure you use it correctly or near correctly.
You know, you can't take our politicians serious. What didn't Marjorie Taylor Greene say? Robert E. Lee was a founding father.
I think she did.
Okay, so I mean things like that are going to happen. And people who know me know I follow politics. I used to be really, really into politics, but I've kind of bagged up because it's getting frustrating.
Yeah.
To the point, but I do think it's intentional that, and I don't care how people vote, whatever, but I do think it's intentional that Trump and his followers are not Steve Bannon to be exact. They're using words like retribution, come retribution, and those who are familiar with that book, it's called. It may be called Come Retribution. Retribution's in the title. I haven't read it since it's been a while, grad school. But it talks about how the southern states wanted to retaliate against Lincoln and the federal government. And it's called like Come Retribution. Someone will look it up. It's a phenomenal book. I don't know if it's still in print, and if it is, it's probably overpriced. Or you might get lucky, someone may not know what they have and it's posted on eBay or something. But it's a phenomenal book. But it's sickening because it's about violence and retaliation and Lincoln and the South, doing some things out of resentment. So I don't think it's intentional that they're using that word. I'm almost pretty sure that they're familiar with that book because most historians who know that book, especially if you study Civil War history, you know that book well. And when I listen to whatever news station I'm listening to, and I'm hearing these phrases, these words, and I don't think that's by accident. Mm-hmm. It comes from the book. I've read the book. And the phrases, the terms that are used, it's dog whistle politics. And and the book is a good book, but I don't agree with it. Duh. Right. But it's a history book. What can I say? I mean, you read both sides. It's important to do that. And I don't think that's by accident, but You can read that book for, it's maybe about 300 pages, maybe about 400.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think what else we need to cover here. So we talked about some trends going on. We talked about preparation. So I guess we should also talk about, and I guess it's fitting that we're kind of in the grievance section, the job market in the history field.
Well, I guess it depends on what you want to study, what type of history, right? So, I mean, that can be applied. I wouldn't be a Debbie Downer with that, because some people, so I have several friends who are attorneys, right?
Yeah.
And depending on what you practice, being an attorney, it was not a good idea.
Right? That's true.
So I would say that applies. My buddy just graduated from med school, right? And depending on what you want to practice, as far as medicine and general practitioner or surgeon or what have you, I don't know if that was a good idea. So I would compare being in the field of history to what you specialize in.
Yeah.
And your experience.
Mm-hmm.
How much experience you have, whether it's research, being a faculty member, all that is definitely a benefit. So if you're fresh out, like any job, you may have, fresh out of graduation, of course, you may have difficulties. You may have to relocate or move.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say. What would your opinion be? Because I have an opinion. What would your
I mean, I think you're right that there are fields that have similar issues.
Mm-hmm.
Another one I became aware of recently is a lot of times for like counselors, mental health people. Sometimes they'll start out at community clinics, and one thing that they do to make sure they always have enough people on hand is they put you on a contract. So if you get a better offer with actual pay and better hours and all that, then you have to buy out your contract.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to pay thousands of dollars to get out of your job.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of almost indentured servitude. And I think similar things apply in a number of fields. Obviously, a lot of lawyers just started doing public defendant work, and that pays, $75 a day or something.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's usually not great.
And then you have some attorneys who are sleeping in their mom's basement.
Yeah.
Because they...
Or in the back of a nail salon, like Saul Goodman at one point.
Yeah, so...
Yes, I mean, it's just, there are a lot of fields where, when you first start out, you start out toward the bottom. Another one I've learned about more recently is, you're talking about general practitioners. I went to a medical history conference not long ago, and apparently there's a huge shortage of GPs, and they're trying to really encourage more people going into med school to become general practitioners. But at the same time, you think about it, they might be needed, but the pay is usually worse. The hours are a lot longer. You have to do more stuff.
Patient load.
Patient load's way higher. So the incentive is obviously to be a specialist.
Yep.
So it's, unless they're going to, instead of just appealing to people's sense of duty and humanitarianism and all that, I mean, they need to provide some material backup for that if they actually want to plug the hole. And I guess a lot of that applies to history too, because a lot of the job openings are, basically teaching in bulk intro-level survey classes.
Right. So, in other words, not everyone is Johnny Cochran.
Right.
Right? If you're an attorney and you're Johnny Cochran, you specialize in something, you're the man or woman. But if you just have a JD, so what? I could have got that online.
Yeah,
have a specialty, focus on something, be the man or woman in your topic, right? So know it well. You want your reputation in that area to be good, right? So if you're at a university and you want to be recognized as the Rome specialist, all right? Of course, you can dibble-dabble in other topics, but have a specialty, right? Don't.
Yeah, you don't want to get pigeonholed into teaching surveys. That's for sure. It's also worth mentioning in academia in general. tenure track is literally winner take all. When I say all, I mean all.
If that's what you want.
Oh yeah.
Because some don't.
Well, I mean I do.
Yeah.
But it's, I mean, you think about it, like, not best pay, best job security, best schedule, best course loads in terms of what you get to teach. You get offices with windows.
What?
Yeah, so you get actual natural lighting.
What?
You get money to go travel, like if you want to go to a conference. Sometimes you get sabbaticals to do research. Sometimes you get an allowance for books every semester, every year. And if you also obviously get benefits. If you're full-time, but say you're a lecturer, you might get benefits, and that's about it. And then you just teach at odd times and courses that are surveys that don't have any motivated students in them. So literally, like in academia,
so mean.
no, I mean it's true though. I mean in academia, there's no reason to be there unless you plan to go tenure track. Frankly, I mean honestly.
If that's what you want, but also you know that all don't want that, right?
I mean there are some people who are content, but I don't know how.
But yeah. But you also have to factor in. So you'll have like an undergrad student who may want history. Would you say, what would you recommend? Would you recommend an undergrad student getting a history education degree, history? Like, what would you, being that is the trajectory that you want, right?
Well,
because I blur lines with my degrees, right? So I have educational policy, higher ed, stuff like that, in history. So I overlap with my background. For your background specifically, would you say that a person who's seeking to go up the chain in history specifically, like you, would you recommend for these students to go history ed? Like, what would you recommend for them?
I mean, if you're trying to go all the way, then just go history, because then you focus more on writing and research, get you into grad school better. But also, of course, it depends on what you might be trying to do. So, like, you're not sure, but you know you want to do something in history, you're not sure what, then maybe at that point, history ed might be a better option. Because it has the backup plan.
The backup plan
built
okay.
in. But at the same time, if you are thinking I almost certainly want to do the academic route, then history ed might be an impediment if you're trying to get into grad school.
Okay. So you're saying that, okay, that makes sense. So yeah, not psychology. The worst degree you can probably get in college is probably psychology. A bachelor's in psychology.
I don't know what the worst degree would be. I would say probably business, because it's outdated so quickly. Oh yeah.
You think? I don't think you need a degree, well, to be a business owner, because my family has owned businesses, and
I mean
that's not necessary. But people like the business degrees. That's
well, it's because it's easy. That's why it's popular. And literally, that's also why it was invented. In the wake of the GI Bill, they just looked and they said, okay, we're gonna have a huge influx of new students. A lot of them are not going to be traditional college material, so we need to create a major that we know that they can get through. And so business was created. And that's the truth. I mean, that happened in the late 40s. So, I don't know, the worst degree overall, I want to say probably, well, it depends on obviously who you are, but if you're trying to do a degree just of something you like, which I guess is what a lot of people do, unless you're good at it, the worst degree I'd say would be art. Not art history, but art. Because unless you think that you've got the talent to do things with it, if you don't have that natural ability to go with the art, then it's just a hobby. So I would say that might be the bottom of the barrel, but that's very subjective. But unless you have the talent, obviously, in which case you have to develop it with your art degree.
But do you really need a degree to be an artist?
You don't, which I guess is also fair point. Which also I think helps my case.
No,
but
like me, like music. I hate to say, like some of my favorite musicians didn't have degrees in music. Like Prince.
Yes.
Never had. Prince played every instrument, and I'm not even close to his level. So
Right.
I'm not saying that, not even close. I'm eons away. But I've been playing clearly for a while. Never once thought about getting a degree in it, because the more you
Right.
practice, the better you get. And as a musician, we teach ourselves theory. But I know several people who went to Juilliard who I play with, or who went to Berkeley who I play with. So I think, you know, composition is good and all that, but no, I mean, I'm not saying don't get a music degree. I'm just saying, like, some of my favorite musicians.
I mean, I guess if you want to teach it, then you probably need the degree for that. But in terms of performing music, I mean, I'm not a musician myself, so I don't really know, but I can't imagine that the degree helps that much, unless it's just, you know, it gives you a good reason to focus on music during your college years and develop.
The music theory part. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't have a degree in music, but I guess people who like me would say I'm a musician.
Well, so I guess that'd be the same thing I said about art, though. Like, if it's something that, you know, you think
It's
that
a hobby.
you think that you can develop further, and you think that you can cultivate the talent that you have. Maybe, like, you know, you don't think you'll make it on your own without a structured environment, but you think you can develop that talent. Then in that case, I'd say go for it. But yeah, it's one of those where I think a lot of it is natural talent, and you either have it or you don't.
It's practice. It's practice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of practice to be a musician. Practice, hours of practice.
I don't know, because I have, you know, tin ear and then bad hands. So I don't think it would matter how much I practice. I think I'd probably be trash either way.
Most of it. But I think you made some good points about if you're wanting to be a career academic, basically maybe, like you said, history ed, then transitioning.
Yeah, and then I guess too, if you're thinking about doing popular history, something what Sean does, in that case you might still want to pick up a master's just to get a feel for a lot of the norms of how history's done.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess most people who end up in popular history probably don't set out to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's just kind of where people end up a lot of times. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
There's also public history, of course, which is
Yes.
a subfield where you
Yeah.
focus on museums and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I really don't know much about that, but I know that it's a specialized program.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be something that is a special skill set that you have to acquire.
And yes, depending on your history program, and don't get us twisted, we don't think that a degree makes you this superior historian. That's not what we're saying. So, but what you do need to expect, we didn't cover this, is in the graduate level history courses, you will encounter theory classes. And some students struggle with it, especially if they've never had theory. If they've only went through history, because history and philosophy are often a department. They're a united department. Some departments you'll have history and political science, yes, but in a lot of institutions, history and philosophy are together. So, in graduate level history courses in these programs, you will encounter theory classes. So your Hegel, your Weber,
Protestant work ethic.
yes, your Nietzsche, and it's going to get under your skin. You will be frustrated.
I kind of liked the theory part of it.
I did after.
Yeah.
I did after. Not at the time.
Von Ranke and Sherwin White, I guess.
Yeah. Well, some of the theory I appreciated, and some of it I did not. But some of it I did. But afterwards I was fine. So keep that in mind. Don't be surprised when you run into that brick wall of theory.
Yes.
Some graduate programs have 2 years of theory. Some have 1 year of theory. I mean,
most of the ones I've encountered only have a semester course,
okay,
historiography, and then that's it.
Okay.
But I guess it depends on what field you're in too, because some fields are a lot more theory based. Because history has theory in it,
Right.
but also a lot of historical methodology is not theory based. A lot of it's just based on finding and pursuing evidence and assembling it, and then the theory just kind of guides how you might think about it.
Finding evidence, supporting it, defending it.
Yeah.
Like Johnny Cochran.
Yeah, a lot of it does work a lot like
The glove
legal
doesn't
case.
fit.
Yeah. Yeah, the glove doesn't fit. You must acquit.
Yes. I don't even know why they told him to put on the glove.
It was a big gamble.
Yeah.
I guess it paid off, but you know.
Let me stop. He passed away.
Yeah, he did pass away
I don't
recently.
want to talk about. My bad. I forgot.
But anyway, well, I guess Johnny Cochran's been dead for a long time.
No, both.
But,
OJ.
Yeah, OJ. Yeah.
I like Johnny Cochran. He has a phenomenal book. Phenomenal. I highly recommend it. If that's your type of reading.
Yeah.
It's not for everybody. Yeah.
Yeah. There's also the O.J. Simpson book, If I Did It, which is totally not a confession.
If is real small.
Yeah, the F is small and a different color. Yeah.
Right. Well, yeah. So yeah, he passed. Let's not be mean today.
Yeah. But anyway.
Maybe he didn't do it. Maybe the killer's still out there.
Yeah, I guess the killer's gonna get away with it now, and OJ's not on the case anymore, though.
Maybe he's still out there. You don't know. I don't know. I wasn't invited.
Yeah. I don't know, but anyway, I think OJ.
Said he didn't do it. Hey, a jury said he's innocent. Our criminal justice system.
Although I do have to say, I do love OJ's attempt at, well, I don't know if there's even an attempt at an escape or what he was doing with the prolonged Bronco chase, but that's still kind of iconic just because of
I would run too.
the odd nature of running at idle speed almost, or yeah, I mean, it's still got to be pretty much the most famous chase ever just because of the decision to go that slow. I think he also did some damage to the brand of the Bronco too, because it kind of went away not long after that.
Maybe he was on a tourist visit. That's what they said about the Capitol, storming the Capitol.
That's true.
They were on
maybe
so maybe he was on a tourist visit.
Yeah, I mean, or
maybe he wanted to tour L.A. I'm out there often. It's a beautiful road, highway 405.
What about yeah, speaking of the Capitol thing, I guess it is interesting that a lot of people defending the rioters now back then were terrified for their lives. Now like, oh, they were just peaceful, great Americans.
That's what the Representative Crockett, Jasmine Crockett, that's what she was saying. She's like, when she was in Congress, she's like, 2 years ago you guys were afraid for your life hiding under the table. Now you're sitting here acting brand new.
Yeah, it's, well, I mean, I guess the stock and trade for politicians has always been hypocrisy.
That's the American
I think
story.
we're more aware of it now just because of technology and instant replay on the internet. But yeah, I think there's still some politicians who haven't caught up with that, and they will say whatever they want to say. They need to say in any context, and then hope it doesn't bite them in the ass, and it always does.
Yeah.
I can only imagine what it would have been like if we'd have had cameras, easily available cell phone cameras, say, I don't know, in the 50s, 60s, 70s.
Yeah.
I can only imagine the kind of stuff that would be on film.
That reminds me of that Richard, well, I was going to say Richard Pryor joke, never mind. But, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Imagine, not even that long ago, just imagine that, maybe 20 cell phones.
Yeah, or even like the 90s, the Clinton years. Or what if Twitter had been around back then?
Oh, my.
I mean, can you imagine Newt Gingrich's account in the 90s?
Damn, I guess we did have cell phone cameras 20 years ago. I forget.
Oh, yeah, we did.
I forget.
Yeah, that was I think that was the big thing, cell phone cameras.
Dang, I forget. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, so like cell phones became
moving.
There was 1 year, it says 3 years in a row. 1 year cell phones became super big, next year digital cameras became super big, and then they combined the next year. And then it's been that way ever since.
Dang,
it's gotten to the point now where nobody has like a specialized camera anymore, really.
Yeah.
So everybody shoots their phone. But yeah, anyway.
I forget the years are passing us by. I should have been reminded of that when I was listening to the radio and they said Metallica was classic rock. I said, what?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess they became famous in the early 90s, right?
I guess that's classic rock.
Yeah, well, I guess
I
up until
better catch
recently
up.
they only added the 90s to the classical
Yeah.
category.
You
But
better catch up.
yeah.
So, but no, I think history as a academia, but yeah, history as a career path is good. Largely, if you can remain current and evolve it.
Yeah.
That's something, because I mean, don't get us wrong, nerds, pro nerds will always love your World War IIs, your Civil Wars. Those classes will always fill an auditorium. That's not going anywhere. But have a specialization. Perhaps keep up with content over the years. So even when you're older and in your cushy seat with Windows, understand that you don't know it all. You're always learning, no matter what age. You and I are always learning as well. So yeah, and it's always something to talk about. That's what I enjoy academia. I enjoy educational policy and higher ed leadership and things like that, because there's always something to talk about. History is good, so we know where we come from, so we don't go back. But it's also political, because people, they want to argue about it and
and reinterpret it in light of whatever happened yesterday.
Yes.
Just like there was one study of Athenian democracy that was a response to Trump and Brexit that I read.
Yes.
And it was pretty shit. But hopefully it did help to popularize the topic of Athenian democracy a little bit. Honestly, it actually did inspire me in a messed up way, because I read it, and this is when I was actually really struggling with dissertation. I was actually thinking about calling it quits.
Oh no.
And I read this book and I said, this is such ass. I could write something better than this in my sleep. So, these two idiots can do it. Then I certainly can.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Don't be defeated.
Yeah.
So you'll encounter a student who will have some of the same disruptive ideas that you had as a student, as far as wanting to quit, and you can say, nope, I'm not going to let you do it.
Yeah. So, I mean, right. And yeah.
I think students who go into history typically enjoy it, but there could be some hoops of fire, like, that will turn you off. So I think it's important to not to jar people to where they're dissuaded, but to be honest and say you're going to encounter, some things. Well, that's just what life.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, academia is good for what you want it for. People are in academia for a variety of reasons. Academics hardly ever retire because they like what they do, so they're around. And
well, I think the big exception to that was when they were told, when COVID broke out, they'd have to teach online. Then a lot of older professors put in their papers at that point. Because I didn't realize how many older professors were anti-technology. I thought that was mostly outside of the academic world. I didn't realize how many old professors were like, nope, I do email and that's all I'm ever going to do. Or I had one professor who has never had a cell phone his entire life. And so he got the university to give him some sort of way to log in without having to go through the Duo thing.
Oh, wow.
So he has some sort of special device that isn't a phone because they catered to him for that. Which again is why you need to be tenured, because there's no fucking way they'd ever do that for like an adjunct.
Well, that sucks that COVID got rid of, that group. That's not good.
Well, I mean, a lot of them were thinking about retiring relatively soon, but it just wasn't an immediate thing. And then, when they told them, oh, you're going to teach online now, you know what? The time is now.
Wow.
So I'm going to be home anyway.
Wow.
I might as well get used to retirement. So,
wow.
Yeah. Here's my paperwork, and I'll see you guys never.
Yeah. I mean, I think you have... see you guys never. I mean, from your perspective, I definitely understand. Like, that's what you want. You want that. So I get it. I get get it. And I think you laid out a pretty good roadmap for it. Mm-hmm. But most people on my side of the aisle prefer 1 foot in academia and 1 foot out of academia.
Yeah.
But yeah, from your side of the aisle, yeah, people are looking to stick around in that ivory tower.
Yeah.
So yeah. But no, I think, as a whole, I think academia is good. I think I have some amazing colleagues, by the way, amazing graduate students, amazing undergraduate students also, my bad. But you know, there are some challenges. But as a very wise person once told me, if you allow something frustrating to make you leave a program or quit a job, you'll be quitting jobs for the rest of your life, because there's always going to be someone who you may have a misunderstanding with or what have you, but those things are going to happen. But just try not to take it personal.
Yeah.
Try not. It's hard not to when someone is clearly being personal. But
Right.
keep in mind what we said. That's about them, not you.
And it kind of comes with the territory no matter where you're at.
Yeah.
So just even leaving the academic world will not prevent you from having to deal with douchebags. So it is what it is. You can't really avoid people like that.
Yeah.
They're everywhere.
But
So.
but the bright side is you'll probably experience more good people than
Definitely.
bad. Unless the bad people influence the good people, because that can happen too. That does happen.
I would say,
You and I have talked about that.
I'll say probably about 80% of the people you end up dealing with in grad school are usually on the better side of things,
Mhm.
At least. And that applies to the professors too. A lot of times because of the stress of grad school, you also end up with a scenario where the professors seem way cooler than your peers. Where it's because your peers are so stressed out and so uptight sometimes that the professors actually seem way more with it. Even like the old professors seem like they're more with the times and more fun to hang out with. So
I like the older professors.
yeah, it's also interesting. A lot of times professors in the last couple of years just don't really care that much, and they'll just tell stories they actually shouldn't be telling.
Those are the best professors.
Yeah, they'll talk about
Don't say
like the 70s. Or there's one professor who told a story that was great though. So he graduated really young, like 1970 or something, and so he'd been an archaeologist for many years.
Oh, nice.
He said that back when he was in grad school that the lobby would be filled with retired professors who would just hang out and smoke and shit. And so they would just talk to students about, this scientific archaeology, I don't really see the virtue in this. I think really the only things you need to be a really great archaeologist are a passport and a revolver.
What?
So, yeah.
Times have changed.
Yeah, so they had very much a kind of Indiana Jones attitude about things, and
Yeah.
anyway, I just find that's why if I ever write anything about the history of archaeology, I'm calling it Passports and Revolvers.
Nice.
Because I think that's got to be the title.
Absolutely, it's a draw. It's a draw.
Yeah.
But I do think history is a topic. It's a content area that will be around because philosophy is kind of falling by the wayside a little bit. Some of those programs are they're leaving. Some institutions are getting rid of their philosophy programs.
Or a lot of them have been folded into religious studies to
Yes.
create like philosophy and religion.
Yes.
With the religion side being much more emphasized usually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, that's a sad thing to see.
It is a sad thing to see. But
Classics, a lot of schools doesn't exist.
did I tell you I have a couple acquaintances that they got their PhD in philosophy? I was thinking, like, man, that's a tough one. But that's what they wanted to do. But yeah, it's a dog-eat-dog world with that degree. But yeah.
Yeah, no,
I enjoyed philosophy a lot. After graduate school, like I said, at the time I didn't. Well, I was a student. No, you're not gonna like it, duh. But yeah, after graduate school, having to take it, you know, looking at my bookshelves, philosophy. So I appreciate it now. I like it quite a bit.
Actually, if I had to do over again when I was an undergrad, I would have taken philosophy as my minor instead of political science. But, yeah, anyway, it is sad to see the field decline. But, you know, a lot of the people the bean counters who run these places just don't value good things. And so they continually gut the humanities.
Gaining a degree, earning a degree in the humanities is good. But, you know, make sure you have a focus. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Have a focus, have an interest, have something to write about. You want your reputation based on that type of writing.
Right.
Don't be defeated if your writing isn't up to par, or if you need to go back to the drawing board. Those things will happen. All right. I just turned in an article for the Journal of Illinois History. They told me to do some revisions and send it back. So, you know, those things will happen. But have a specialization. Just don't graduate and say, I know all history. That's impossible, right? Don't just graduate and say, I am
I'm the oracle of history.
Yeah. You're being dishonest with yourself.
Although that is kind of what
be Johnny Cochran.
Isn't that
be a defense attorney?
Kind of what they want, though, at a lot of those like small private colleges, where you usually have two people. So you got the person who does everything America, and the person who does everything else. And then you have a few adjuncts who fill in once in a while. So I mean that attitude actually kind of can work in a certain context, but you know, if you're trying to be a successful researcher, it's probably not going to pay out. So. But I mean, I think that's kind of the takeaway overall today, is just that context is king. And so...
have a research area.
Yeah, you got to know what you want to do, and you got to fit it to your wants and needs, and make preparations that put you in a position to do that. And so a lot of it boils down to planning and kind of knowing yourself and what you want to do, where you want to be.
Yeah.
So...
if you're an expert in European history, in Greece and Rome, you know, be that, right?
Yeah, and a lot of it too is you want to make sure that whatever topic you're doing, even if it might not necessarily be the most popular trending thing in the world, you got to remember that when you're doing research, it's a very exacting process, and you have to have the passion to get through it. Because if you study something just because you think it will get you a job and you don't really care about it otherwise, you're probably not going to finish.
And don't listen to people, professors, whoever, who you encounter, who think they know more than you than your topic. If you have been studying something for 10, 15, whatever years, you know you're right, and you run across someone with more power and authority than you're a student, they have the power in the room, what have you. Don't let them knock you off your square. Like, you know this, you've been studying this is what you do. Yeah.
Sometimes, too, a lot of professors will kind of challenge you in that way just because they want to see how you react. So I think part of it is boredom, you know, where they want, you know, to see what happens. But also part of it is just like, you know, do you have mettle? Will you stand up for yourself? Because I think there have been professors who...
i.e. they need to get a life.
Well, I mean, sometimes I don't know if it's that. I think sometimes it's just that's how they interact. Like, they only respect and like people after they've been stood up to by them. Because I've seen that happen a few times, where there's a professor who doesn't like somebody, and that person stands up to them, and then the professor all of a sudden is like their best friend. I've seen that happen a few times.
I don't even know why. That has to be a condition.
It might be.
How that can't be healthy.
Either that, or maybe they don't get challenged enough, and they just feel that need in their life because nobody challenges them anymore. I don't know.
That's a neurosis. Like, why is that even necessary? I don't think I could ever.
I mean,
have that personality trait.
I mean, different people have different psychological needs, I guess. It's just...
stay away from me.
Yeah, I don't know. It's I mean, obviously as a student with the power dynamic being unfavorable, it's, you know, usually people are very cautious about engaging with their professors. But actually, it probably pays off more often than not, I would say, to push back. I mean, it's, obviously if you keep it professional and whatnot, but...
In graduate programs.
Yeah.
And we're talking about research and graduate programs and what you know. Right, because you will encounter. So, for example, if you are an expert in Alexander the Great, in a graduate program, you want to write, I don't know, whatever on Alexander. All right, maybe you want to talk about him in Egypt. This is just hypothetical. This is for example, and you come across a professor who you're bumping heads with about Alexander the Great. You're a grad student, which means you know something, right? You're past boilerplate.
Hopefully.
At this stage, just make sure you have your research, your citations, and heck, write about Alexander the Great if that's what you want to write about. Now, for undergrad students, that's a lot different because oftentimes undergrad students, they're just Googling stuff on the internet, and they're finding anything to rebuttal, and some of it can lack depth. But for a graduate student, you're at a different level. All right? So keep that in mind.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and I think, too, professors expect you to start engaging in academic debates by the time you're a grad student, if not even a little before that, because that's kind of what they're looking for. I actually had one professor tell me, and I thought it was a critique at first, he said, "You're very stubborn." And I thought there was going to be like a follow-up that would be negative. He said, but that's actually something that you have to be successful in academia. Because if you're not stubborn, if you don't stand your ground, if you don't persist, you're not going to make it.
And why would you not if this is your topic that you're writing about? Like, I don't understand what type of sickness that is to want someone to not write about something they're passionate about. And we're talking about writing and research. So, like, yeah.
Well, I mean, it's I think too, again, getting back to the, like, you're negotiating your topic with your advisor, it is kind of a fraud area because obviously you got to have something you're passionate about to have the juice to get through it.
Yes.
But also you want to make sure it's viable, that it's at least hopefully somewhat relevant, or there's some part of it that you can relate to things that are trending. Maybe not the whole thing, but some part of it.
Right.
And so you want to touch on a few different things if possible. So like what I wrote about deals with military affairs, democracy, democratic accountability. It also deals with things like class, state finance. So there's a lot of different ways I could potentially market that, and I have tried to market it before. Mm-hmm. So it just depends on what I need it for. But you do want it to have things that have some flexibility and some range in them.
Yes.
But at the same time, to have new research, a lot of times it does have to be fairly narrowly focused to achieve the objective of a dissertation, which is a new original research to show that you're now a professional functioning historian. So it can be a delicate balancing act, and I mean I think it's necessary to kind of negotiate that out with your advisor, and also maybe if there are a couple other faculty or an adjacent field, you probably want to chat them up too, and make sure that you're clear to your advisor about what you're trying to do, and then also be open to dropping things. So it's better to start off with too much and then drop things as needed. Right. I think that's what most people do usually, is you come up with a bigger topic and then you chop away parts of it until you just have the feasible part. Mm-hmm. And so hopefully, your advisor encourages that, and I think most advisors are willing to go along, so long as you're open to their feedback as you move along.
Right.
So I think it is a balancing act, and it's kind of a dance.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. But it's good. I mean, like I said, I think it's important. It's a research degree,
Yeah.
For sure. So and you're defending, you're finding facts, you're putting facts together, and it's good. It can be used in many ways. So yes, absolutely.
Yep. well, I guess we've covered some things that involve the state of history, at least. So.
Yes, we did.
And I'm hoping the microphone adjustments we made were successful, because I know we had a little trouble before starting. So hopefully that panned out okay with the gain and some other things being adjusted. So yeah.
Just don't write about Caitlin Clark being bullied. Don't make that a topic.
Well, I mean, I guess at this point that would be
The
more in like
history of,
the Women's Studies department, something
Yeah,
more
I know.
contemporary.
Yes.
I'm sure somebody's going to write that paper.
Oh,
though. I mean, it's gonna
100%.
happen.
I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to it.
Apparently in China,
Oh,
you can actually you can get a major in studying the MBA.
nice.
Yeah, so you could just be an MBA historian
That's what's
as
up.
your major or minor.
Nice.
So if you could combine that with really top-notch English, then you could just become a television journalist and go on one of those
Absolutely.
debate shows. But
Yeah.
obviously here you cannot major in the study of a sport.
Maybe it's to be continued.
I mean, maybe that's the
Yeah,
next step
sports
forward
journalism.
with like creating new majors that anybody can do. It's like, yeah, major in NFL.
Yeah.
Or-
Well, they have journalists who focus on sports.
That's
right?
true.
So
Yeah. Actually, there's got to be some classes on sports journalism. I guess.
100%.
Yeah.
100. Yes, I'm positive.
I mean, and nothing against sports journalism, but I think investigative journalism needs to be the thing that's really pushed, because we don't have nearly enough of that. Especially once things like Vice have collapsed and all that.
People who study sports journalism through a historical lens, they usually have a wealth of knowledge from the past.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're pretty savvy. Like a lot of them are, talking about the Boston days and Bill Russell and
Yeah.
all that stuff. So yeah, it collides. History collides with a lot of topics.
Yeah. If somebody could write a dissertation on, I don't know, early pro wrestling, like
Oh my
territorial
goodness.
wrestling. And that would be
Loser.
interesting. There also is a book out about that now called Ballyhoo, and it's about sort of the early days of wrestling in America.
Well, all right.
Yeah, I've heard it's pretty good. I don't know. I haven't had a chance to see it, but yeah, apparently, carny folk.
Hey,
Kind of where it's still at, but it started out definitely as kind of a carny thing. So you got some very outsized personalities involved.
Wow. Oh, it's been wonderful, everyone.
Yeah, for sure. All right.
It's always nice to talk.
Yeah.
Even though our conversations, like we always say, go astray sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, you got to go where the conversation takes you. It's kind of like when you're doing research, you go sometimes in unexpected directions that you can't really predict going in.
That is true.
You
You think you're going to talk about one thing, and you are a indentured person to the research.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes that happens.
Mhm.
And, yeah.
That's where evidence leads you. It does.
Yeah, I mean,
It's-
you got to
you
follow
have-
the evidence where it leads,
Yeah.
not where you thought it would have led.
Yeah. You thought the killer was the maid, but it's actually
Grover Cleveland.
who shot JR.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what history is. You follow the evidence.
Yep. All right, well, I guess we'll call it a day with that, and thank you everybody for tuning in, and I'll see you in the near future.
Bye, everyone.